Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Benjamin Red. I'm joined by Nizar Hassan. Hey Nizar, how's it going?
Hi. Great.
Welcome back. This is our first time since you are back from getting your master's degree.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What was your degree in exactly?
Development studies.
All right.
From the University of London. Yep.
So now you can go and develop things.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Definitely that.
Well, congratulations. Welcome back. And we're back from a hiatus as well. We took 3 weeks. You were gone 2 weeks. We had planned to go on hiatus for 2 weeks, right? And then something happened. Our producer, the morning that we were going to record 3 weeks ago, a fire broke out in her home. And so we didn't. We went on a little extended hiatus. So now we're back, though. 3 weeks off. Full of energy, and lots of stuff went on as well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Exciting.
Yeah, right. But it seems to me like the most exciting things happened like within the past week, as always.
I know.
Right?
I know.
Right. I mean, how often do you discover chicken coops in the National Electricity Company? Right. Like this is the greatest story ever. Right. So they found, I guess, there's this inspection bureau, government inspection bureau, and they went to EDL, Electricity du Liban, and they found chicken coops in the basement of the headquarters of the company. And so, of course, this blew up on social media. Everybody's making fun of this, and especially because, like, okay, we don't have 24-hour electricity here, yet somehow the chickens got 24-hour electricity.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, EDL is already a joke, so now it's there are so many ways we can make jokes about it.
Right. Yeah, they nobody really respects EDL in this country. Anyway, we also had a fun story from our president, Michel Aoun. He made sort of a faux pas, right?
Yeah, just a slip of a tongue while giving the name for the new generation of army officers during the Army Day celebration.
Yeah, so like a new class of cadets was graduating or something, right? Yeah, and so and typically when this happens, they request that the president give them like a name for their class, and they request that name, and then like the president responds and gives them that name, right?
Exactly.
And so what
they requested the name Fajr al-Jurud, which is the operation where the Lebanese army liberated the outskirts of Arsal.
Right, against Daesh and Nusra and all those guys, right? Yeah.
And he responded saying, let your generation be named Fajr al-Qurud, which means the dawn of the apes or the monkeys. It's just a slip of a tongue, but the whole country, to say appropriately, they lost their shit about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those like tiny little things. It's not like mean or anything in mean spirit. At least like I don't think for most people, like it was just a slip of the tongue. But like people were, sort of defensive about it as well.
FPM's people got really defensive. Yeah.
You told me they changed on, was it Tele Liban?
Tele Liban and MTV, and obviously OTV. I didn't see OTV, but I think as well.
OTV is the FPM station,
exactly.
Right? Yeah, right.
But MTV and Tele Liban, they edited the video so that Aoun says Fajr al-Jurud rather than Fajr al-Qurud.
Which is good. So they went and found some other audio of Aoun saying Fajr al-Jurud.
Exactly.
And replaced it in the video.
And the editing was quite bad, so you could notice it very clearly.
Also, things that have been going on since we left you guys. The McKinsey report that was commissioned by the government to what can we do to, kickstart the economy and all this stuff. That came out. We haven't seen it yet. It hasn't been publicly released. But the headline is that, cannabis and avocados can be used to jumpstart the economy. Like if you legalize cannabis. And of course, people like Walid Jumblat were like, oh, really? We had to pay like $1 million to find that out. What I've been telling you for years,
Yeah, the results were very obvious and it wasn't very informative, to say the least.
Yeah, not the greatest advertisement for McKinsey. Although we don't know because we haven't seen the report. They won't release the goddamn report, so we can't actually judge it on its merits. So it just looks bad for them right now. It's a PR sort of disaster for McKinsey. Also, we had another refugee return, this time larger, so these things are going to keep on going on, and we're going to keep an eye on that. One thing I think that's interesting that happened a couple of weeks ago, Parliament elected their committee members. And just really quickly, I think that it's interesting to note the numbers. I crunched the numbers on this, and if you look at like the proportion of seats that the parties won, some parties sort of like punched above their weight and some definitely punched below their weight in getting committee assignments.
Okay.
And whether that's, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference in the end, but it is interesting, I think, that Amal punched so far above their weight. They should have gotten, based on what their block got, their 17-member block, they should have had 28 or 29 of the 214 seats on committees. Instead, they took 36. So they punched above their weight by like 7.5 seats, right? Nice. Which is pretty impressive. Nobody else did that. Like some people like punched below their weight significantly. Like the PSP were down like 5 seats. They should have had five more committee chairs or 5 more committee seats than they actually took. The Merida Karami block as well was like 4 under.
I was very excited about legislation.
Yeah, right. Like, come on, get in there. And another interesting thing is that there were some, a lot of these parliamentarians are new, right? There were like 79 new members of parliament, I guess, or like 60 some odd, who had never been in parliament before. And some of them, like Tony Frangie, for instance, he could be like sort of the Zaim. I'm not going to go on any committee assignments because that's sort of what, if you're the Zaim, you don't do that, right? Mm-hmm. But he took committee assignments, which I respect that. That's really cool that he didn't just say, oh, I'm above all of this process of legislation. No, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to, take a committee assignment or two.
Yeah, I appreciate your appreciation, but he's like 30. I mean, if he doesn't do that,
he's
quite useless.
Well, Timur Jumblat didn't take anything.
Okay, no comment on that.
All right, moving on. So, like a really big thing that happened this week that's going to be happening next week rather, is that the power barge, the third power barge, the free power barge that we're getting for the summer, right? The electrical power barge.
From the Turkish company who's offering us the electricity, right?
Yeah, right now it's docked in Giye. It was supposed to be in Zahrani in the south, and then now it's in Giye, and on Monday, it's going to depart. It's scheduled to depart to go up to Zouk Mikhail, just north of Beirut and Kesselrain, and be connected there. And the Kesselrainis are going to get like more than 21 hours of electricity, which is
that's what the FPM people are saying. To be honest, it's not really.
No, EDL is saying that as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there was a great piece in my publication, The Daily Star. Timur Azhari reported that an EDL source actually said no, they will get more than 21 hours of electricity, and basically all of the extra power from this power barge is going to go to Jbeil, Kesserrain, and Metin right there. That's sort of like Christian heartland there, right?
Yep.
It's not going to go to the rest of the country. So if you live in that area, congratulations, you have more electricity. You'll probably have more electricity than people in Beirut have, at least until the power barge leaves us, supposedly, in the future.
I really think this is one of the most amazing stories because people like Zama leaders are rejecting electricity to be provided to their main constituents. This is what happened with Birri or the Amal movement, rejecting the barge in Zahrani, saying it's because of environmental concerns. But actually what all the analysis, like all the reports are saying is that because the private generators lobby rejected it because they would run out of business, or at least for 3 months they would not have any good income because people would have electricity from the state. Imagine that. And then Jumblat also rejected it in G, said we don't want it here. Also, I think citing
in GA, supposedly the deal was like, okay, we'll take the power barge, but we want you to reduce the amount of power that the GA power plant is producing because it's really dirty and making.
And the people are very mobilized around it. So Jumblat was afraid that maybe bringing another source of pollution to this place would provoke more and more mobilization among the people.
And so when they brought it, though, like they didn't decrease the power plant. So, like according to one PSP MP, like they actually increased the GA power plant. And then this power barge has a capacity to give like 235 megawatts or something like that. And only 35 of those were being used because the technical capacity like just wasn't there to add more, right? And so there's this like sort of fascinating like technical and political like
Yeah, and
angle
all these
to
different
this.
like actors involved, like the private generators lobby, literally fighting against people having electricity from the state, and then you have people mobilizing and how it's affecting like the leader's decision to whether accept more electricity or not. So it's really a very interesting like political game that's happening around this.
Right.
And then
right.
the winner was FPM saying, yeah, we're going to give you 22 or 24 hours of electricity.
Yeah.
It's like they basically got the victory out of this whole political mess. So
Right.
it's an interesting.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a great victory for all of the, especially the Kiswahili MPs. So the other like continuing big story, of course, that we have
Your
is
favorite.
my favorite cabinet formation, of course. And when we left you last time, it was still early in the game, right?
Yeah.
It was like a month and a half. Like no, now we are a solid like 2.5 months in almost. When you listen to this on Monday, it will have been 74 days from May 24th, when Saad Hariri was designated to form a government. And so we're definitely past like the lightning fast government formation phase and moving on towards like the 2009 or 2011 government formation phase. Those took like 135 and 139 days respectively. And that's sort of like, I think, what everybody sort of thought was going to happen anyway. Just for our listeners who are outside Lebanon, there is no sense right now that there will be a government formed in August. I mean, anything could happen. And these things have been known to like turn on a dime before. But like Hariri is out of the country now on vacation, I believe. Jaja, same. August is typically a month that everybody just sort of like goes on vacation and comes out. It's really hot right now. It's you can't get any work done, honestly.
Too humid for a government.
Yeah, exactly. And besides that, like September is when things like start up administratively, like you've got schools starting up, things like that. And so that's really when you need to start having a government. And so most likely that's when we'll see movement on this. Now, that being said, there's been this debate, and I've wanted to talk about this for a while on this program, about what exactly is causing the delay in the government formation. And specifically, is it external factors or internal factors? Mm-hmm. And so there's this argument that says it's really mostly external. And there's a few different cases for that. There's one case that says, Saudi and other American allies were sort of waiting to see if something would change in the region, especially with the Trump administration starting to press harder on Iran, sanctions coming into effect, that sort of a thing. The thinking was, why lock in a Lebanese after the elections in May that were sort of like won by like the former March 8th forces? Why lock in this government now when something might change regionally in just a couple of months that would change things and maybe make government formation more favorable to like a Western mindset? That seems to me like it strikes me as like overly optimistic about things, and like, well, that's not really how quickly things work here. If you want to do that, you might be waiting much longer than you anticipated.
Yeah.
But this is one of the arguments. Another argument that in the case for the external factors is that actually Saudi wants to punish Lebanon. This is a really weird argument, right? It says that Riyadh basically acknowledges that Lebanon has fallen into Iran's and Hezbollah's clutches, right? Mm-hmm. And so it would actually be easier for the international community to impose like really strict sanctions on Lebanon if you just say no Hariri government, just let Hezbollah, FPM, Amal, those guys form a government on their own, and then like the international community can be like, no, sanctions, and then in the long term you are able to sort of like punish Lebanon into submission, I guess. It's a weird argument to me, because it's sort of like, let's lose Lebanon in order to get it back, which is possibly somebody's calculus, but it strikes me as also like sort of a stretch, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Now there's a third argument that me personally, I think carries a little bit more weight, And that is sort of like there is an external factor, but it's more the lack of external factors, right? In that there's nobody in Riyadh calling up Walid Jumblat or, calling up Gibran Bassil and saying, if you give in on this point in the cabinet formation process, we're going to give you X, Y, Z in compensation. Those calls clearly are not happening, right? And so this makes me think like, okay, so there's nobody actively seemingly, facilitating from the outside a government formation. And that seems pretty plain as day. So those are sort of the three arguments about like external factors. And
I think the last one you mentioned implies that it's actually internal factors that are hindering government formation, but there's a lack of external factors that would catalyze it otherwise, right?
Right. And this sort of like lines up with, and maybe it's just because like I'm too close to it. I'm living here in Lebanon and I deal with this stuff every single day. But it seems to me that no, it's mostly it's internal, and the biggest thing to me is the Christian representation. I mean, this is nothing groundbreaking, but very clearly you have this problem between the FPM and the LF that is not being solved. And it seems to me, I would argue that this is basically because Gibran Bassil and the FPM are trying to press their advantage right now. Yeah. And it makes sense that they would. Right now, Gibran Bassil is more powerful than he has ever been before.
Probably he will ever be also.
Well, we don't know that, right? He's gunning for the presidency, right? Yeah. That we know that is what he wants. Once Aoun leaves office, he wants to be the next president of the Lebanese Republic, right? And right now, though, he's at this point where he is the leader of the largest bloc in parliament. He is the president of the biggest Christian party in the country. He is also a minister, a longtime minister. We just hit the 10-year mark that he has been a minister in the government. His father-in-law is the president. So he's got all of these levers right now. Yeah. And if he wants to...
Make any political advances, it will be now. Right?
Yeah, exactly. He's got to lock in these gains and do even more if he wants a better chance at sitting in Babda Palace in the future, right? And so you see these things like, you hear these rumors of like he's asking for like a blocking third in cabinet, which is crazy. Like if you have 1/3 plus one member in cabinet, you can basically stop all work, right, according to the Constitution. So he supposedly is asking for that, which is insane. Like everybody in the negotiations asked for a little bit more than they actually should get, but he seems to be asking for a whole lot more. But it makes sense about that as well, right? Because of that position that he's in. But it also means that, well, we're not going to see a government anytime soon until something happens and there's some sort of pressure, specifically probably coming from Aoun or some external factor
or
that happens.
Hezbollah.
Or Hezbollah, right.
Eventually, it has to happen.
I mean, eventually, this is the thing. Like increasingly, it's on borrowed time. Nobody wants to see a 10-month gap before a new government takes office.
But yeah, that explains why Gibran Bassil is basically like opening battles with everyone, right? He has this battle with Birri, with Jumblat, with the Lebanese forces. It's just
right.
Everybody's enemies.
Right.
Now, yeah?
Right. Which I don't know about the strategy of that, if that's going to be an effective strategy or not. But I don't know. We'll see.
But I think it's really like interesting because to a lot of people it's a bit strange that FPM is now the most influential and like the political party that can basically make things work or stop things from working or getting the biggest political share of everything. And like Bassil having this much leverage, whereas a few years back he was like really seen as, he was not taken as serious, to say the least, by like Lebanese people in general and also in the political scene. He was still under Aoun's shadow. He was still I
mean, that continues till today. Right. He's still under
But he's getting first stage more.
Well, Aoun, it is sort of like trying to promote him, right? So you have bloc leaders visiting Babda Palace and Aoun basically saying, no, you need to talk to the leader of the FPM, who is Gibran Bassil. Now, that makes sense on paper, like the president of the country saying, no, you need to talk to your like Samir Jaja, you need to talk to your counterpart, Gibran Bassil. But in reality, like Aoun
He's
is
not
still
there yet,
seen as just in terms of public perception, Aoun is still the Zaim,
Yeah.
right? It's
And,
not
I mean,
Shabab
Gibran Basir, when he was inaugurated as the head of FPM, he said literally, Aoun will be the eternal leader of the party.
Yeah.
Like, it was very clear that he's not trying to sideline Aoun in any way. He's still in his shadow, as you're saying. Yeah.
But so how did the FPM become so powerful, though? I think that's a really basic question that we have to answer, right? If we want to understand what's going on.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think to understand the FPM, we should mostly understand Aoun, because it's really Aoun's party.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that later. But FPM started recently as as an official political party, but it started with the movement that Aoun had as a chief of the armed forces in late 80s, when he was also asked by then President Amin Jumail to head a military government. So we had two governments at the same time, Salim Hossa's government and Michel Aoun's government.
East Beirut, West Beirut, yeah.
Exactly, the Muslim and the Christian governments. And then Aoun fought what he called the liberation war against the Syrian army troops, which had been in Lebanon for 14 years back then. And the Syrians kind of won. They advanced onto Ba'abda Palace, where he was staying, and then he fled to the French embassy, and 10 months later he went into exile to France till 2005. So when he went to France, he continued mobilizing people against the tutelage of the Syrian army in Lebanon, and the Ta'if Accord, which ended the civil war, but was also Syria-sponsored, so it was seen as kind of normalizing Syria's political power in Lebanon.
Yeah.
He came back in 2005 after the huge mobilization against the Syrian army, what was called the Cedars Revolution, the March 14 huge protest, which led to the Syrian army withdrawing from Lebanon. So he came back in May 2005. First thing he did went to reconcile with Jaja, because he had fought against Jaja in the late 80s. When Jaja was still in prison, actually, in 2005, he went and had a meeting with Strida Jaja's wife, and the current MP. And after that, he kind of launched the FPM as an official political party in Lebanon. And I think it's interesting to kind of look at what it stood for, because right now we don't see parties in Lebanon as really
the way it started out, back in 2005 and everything, there were a lot of people and I'm not just talking about at the high levels in the Aoun family or anything, but people on the ground who really believed in all of these principles. They had a manifesto and everything. So the major points of that, a commitment to capitalism, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I can say that I remember how many people of what is called civil society and activists and people who are very progressive were in the FPM when it started.
I mean, it was sort of an almost left-ish leaning.
Yeah, center-left, but mostly very progressive. Very secular, it's democratic, because the charter of the FPM itself says that, it's committed to capitalism and free enterprise, but it's also within the limits of social justice and welfare, so it's kind of a center-left kind of party. It's secularist. It calls for a secular state and the separation of religion and politics. It also says that women and men are equal, and we should do whatever we can to establish gender equality in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And it says that democracy is the system in Lebanon, and we should fight against the mentality of tutelage. And there was this whole discourse against feudalism and against the Zaim political culture that we have in Lebanon. By FPM.
Right, so they were like a leading voice and saying this feudalist state needs to end. We're this thing that's based on families,
new kind of politics.
Yeah.
Exactly. By the way, our listeners, you can find the link to the charter in the description of this episode.
And so this is how things started, right? So really 2005. Yes, there had been a lot of organizing in France before this, in France and Lebanon before this. But when Aoun came back in 2005, that's really when things started. And we also had elections in 2005, right?
Exactly. Aoun came back to a huge welcome from a lot of people who were protesting and involved in the March 14 movement. A lot of people from Lebanese forces and Kataib as well, by the way, were very excited about Aoun returning because of what he represented as the anti-Syrian kind of figure. He came back. The elections, actually, you had this coalition of all the major political forces: Hezbollah, Amal, Future Movement, Lebanese forces, and Jumblat's PSP, against Aoun in the elections. So what was called the Quadruple Alliance. And Jumblat then called Aoun tsunami, like a political threat to the Lebanese system. And he was right, because Aoun came back. The first election, after being banned from organizing for so long, he got 15 MPs. Compared to 6 for Lebanese forces and 2 for Katab. So he was like literally like the most significant political force.
He came in and just like upended things.
Exactly.
Right. Just like turned over tables, said, okay, this is, I am here. You can't keep me out. You have to deal with me.
Exactly.
Right.
And back then it was like kind of the Aoun who's anti-Ta'if against the Ta'if forces. But then what switched things completely was the memorandum of understanding with Hezbollah. It was the first time that Aoun meets Nasrallah in February 2006. And they established the Memorandum of Understanding, which most importantly established that FPM was not going to be Hezbollah's political enemy. That it was only through dialogue that they would resolve all issues, including like hinting at Hezbollah's weapons, that they are committed to a common stance on Syria, which was the most interesting part.
Right, like all of Aoun's history up to this point has been based on opposition to Syria.
Exactly.
Like literally fighting against the Syrians in like 1989, and then coming back to Lebanon only after the Syrians had withdrawn from the country, right?
Exactly, and he, before coming back, he accused Syria of killing Rafiq Hariri, by the way. This is like, there's a video of that on YouTube, everyone can see it. He said Syria killed Rafiq Hariri. He was like super anti-Syrian in all of his rhetoric and his politics.
So this 2006 agreement, Markhal agreement, like this was watershed.
Yeah, this changed things completely. And this established the beginning of the alliance between Aoun and Hezbollah. But what's really, I think, kind of gave it its actual political weight, and what made Aoun part of the wider March 8 coalition was the anti-government mobilization in 2006 to 2008.
Right, so Fouad Senghor basically formed a government after the elections in 2005, exactly. And it was sort of a majoritarian government, right? Yeah. But it didn't really last too long, right? Because in 2006 we had a bunch of ministers like Hezbollah Amal withdraw or resign from the cabinet, right? And then we also had all of these protests and everything, right?
Exactly. There was an occupation of like a civil occupation of downtown Beirut for a while, and there was like this huge slogan أصفر أخضر ليموني بدنا نسقط الحكومة, which means yellow, green, and orange. We're going to overthrow the government. But it was like something that rhymes pretty well in Arabic. So it was huge mobilization, and it kind of established FPM as part of the March 8 wide coalition. And then after, we had these clashes in 2008 when the government was trying to crack down on Hezbollah's telecommunications network, and there was the fighting between Hezbollah and Future.
Yeah, everything sort of like came to a head in May 2008, the so-called May events, Hezbollah taking over parts of the country, rolled into West Beirut, for instance.
And then Shuf as well against the PSP forces. And then you had the Doha agreement, which kind of...
Right, so this is sort of like the breaking point. Like everybody was like, okay, no, we need to sit down and talk this out before like the civil war starts again.
Exactly. So it was kind of a new Ta'if, but it was like a preventive kind of Ta'if accord.
Yeah.
And after the Doha agreement, most importantly, Aoun went to see Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and he went to Iran as well. So it was a new political era for Lebanon, and Aoun was making clear where he stands. He's an ally to Syria to a certain extent, because he went to see Bashar al-Assad, and to Iran in a very short period of time. So he's established himself as not only Hezbollah's ally, but also Syria's ally. It was just few months before the elections of 2009.
Yeah, so and this sort of completed, if there was any doubt about the Hezbollah 2006 memorandum and his position on Syria, like this sort of completed everything. All right, so what happened in 89 and all that stuff, that's done completely. It completed his movement to the other like sort of pro-Syrian side, right?
Exactly. And the alliance that FPM struck with Hezbollah and Amal in the 2009 elections was also the official alliance, right? Because they waged the elections along with Hezbollah, Amal, and Frangiya as well. And FPM won a quite large share of the parliament with 20 MPs. So it kind of maintained its number of MPs with one more, and established itself in the political alliance with these forces formally.
Yeah.
And I think it's just now we can fast forward to 2018 with the recent
Yeah, I mean,
elections.
that was really the important point in all of this was that changing his position on Syria, right? And the
Exactly.
way that happened between 2005 and 2008, roughly. And then
Exactly.
everything since then, like there haven't been huge. There have been changes inside the party, right? They've been growing. They've been extending their networks inside the civil service, inside the bureaucracy. There have been changes inside the party as well, with Aoun, stepping down as the leader and basically appointing Gibran Bassil as the new leader of the FPM. But fundamentally, there haven't been like these huge shifts since then between 2008 and today.
Exactly.
the
As
past
you said,
decade.
the most important part is that through its alliance with Hezbollah, through its maybe change of position towards Syria, and all of these things that we talked about, FPM went from being a force that was sidelined by all the major political forces into the major Christian political force and kind of the prominent, the party with the prominent Christian share in government. So.
But I mean, the other interesting change, though, it is sort of like the low key one, right? That's just sort of like administrative in nature, and like what do they stand for? If we, you talked about the principles that they were based on back in 2005.
Yeah.
They laid out. If we look at those today, they don't quite stack up,
Oh,
right?
no, they don't. Yeah, they definitely don't. Yeah.
like taking gender equality, right, as an example. How many MPs and ministers have they ever had? I know Gilbert Swain in the last parliament. This parliament, they don't have any women MPs.
29 MPs, 0 women.
Exactly. They have never had a minister,
Never.
female minister. And so, okay, you talk this game, but where is the action,
Yeah.
right?
And also on other issues, right? Like they came back as a secular party, and I remember all these debates about secularism between Alain Aoun and more like mainstream like establishment politicians back then about secularism and stuff like that. And now it's exactly the opposite of that. Like now FPM represents the right-wing Christian kind of political rhetoric in Lebanon. It's very,
Which is
very
politically
Christian-oriented.
smart.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets you votes.
It works.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, this was a huge shift as well. There's absolutely no mention of secularism anymore anywhere. It's rather focused on the partnership between Christians and Muslims and the Christians' share and Christians' rights in politics.
Yeah.
Even in terms of like basic, I think, political culture, the idea that FPM was the anti-feudalist, the anti-family politics kind of movement, the democratic movement, the ideological democratic movement.
Right.
Did not really.
I mean, if you look at who's in power today from this, I mean, there's a lot of Aouns that come up.
Yeah.
You have Michel Aoun at the top, and then who replaced him as the leader of the FPM and as its most prominent minister, Gibran Bassil, who is his son-in-law.
Yeah.
Right.
And I really think it's interesting to tell like our listeners how this happened, right? The elections inside FPM, because Alain Aoun was the most popular, and he was expected to be the next FPM leader.
Which, by the way, he's the nephew of Michel Aoun.
Oh, okay. So it's not a big change, but still, Aoun clearly preferred Bassil over Alain Aoun because the elections were about to happen, and then Michel Aoun asked Alain Aoun to withdraw. Everyone knew that Bassil was not very popular and that Aoun would win. And then Alain Aoun said, upon the wish of the leader, Michel Aoun, I'm going to withdraw from the race for the sake of the unity of the party. So it was a bit strange. A lot of FPM members resigned or quit or like.
I would be careful not to overstate that.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, Alain Aoun is still like one of the major leaders of the FPM. One of those prominent members. So you've got Alain Aoun, who was up for the leadership, didn't get it. It went to the son-in-law instead of the nephew. And then you have sort of a newcomer, Shamil Rukos, who is another son-in-law of Aoun, being elected as an MP. Aoun, prior to this, Aoun had pushed very, very hard for Shamil to become the next leader of the army.
Yep.
And that was shut down by the other political forces. So he said, okay, enough of this. He'll go into politics instead. He'll become an MP. He's his name is widely circulated as a potential minister in the next government. And then you also have Shamel's wife, Claudine Roukos, who's the head of the National Committee for Lebanese Women. That's a state organization. She helps out her father. She's an FPM official, or was. And she runs this, or she's a partner in this advertising agency that has that has a lot of connections. That represents a lot of state institutions and private institutions, of both those affiliated with the FPM and those not. Honestly,
but like 7 ministries and many other state institutions as clients.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
yeah. Which I mean, also, okay, Lebanon's a small place, so if you're big, then you may have all of these different clients if you're good at your business, right?
Yeah, you're a nice person.
We also have Aoun has 3 daughters, so we've talked about 2 of the sons-in-law and one of those daughters, and then there's the third daughter, Mireille, who is one of his top advisors in Abd Palace. And her name has been circulated as well as potentially being a minister, which would be, hey, the FPM's first woman minister.
Aoun's daughter.
Yeah. So maybe that would be a good thing in the scheme of things. Like if you put all this together, you sort of have this feeling that like, oh, if you want to get ahead in Lebanon, you just need to, be an Aoun. You need to marry into the Aoun family. Considering the anti-feudalism aspect of what the FPM was based on, it's a lot of cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's very contradictory to what it stood for, to say the least. And I've seen discussions among the O-Room website where all these FPM members discuss things.
Oh, that is a great site. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And
it's just like a bulletin board. You should definitely check it out, listeners.
Yeah, it's called the Orange Room or oroom.com or something like that. And the people were talking about this, like, is Aoun betraying our values by doing that? I mean, he's definitely going towards nepotism as, like, the way he does politics. But how far will he go? Is it going to be like a real like political dynasty kind of thing? Will we see like more and more family members in the future? Or is it just like the people who were around him when he was returning and gaining political leverage? But there is a bit of dissatisfaction, to say the least, with this. The fourth main element of the charter that we talked about, which is like commitment to the welfare state and social justice, etc. We also have to point that FPM has completely changed on that as well. I mean, in terms of policies, FPM has been one of the most right-wing political factions in like economic policies. Even in terms of composition of their new political elite, they're running with businessmen everywhere. They had Nicolas Chammas on their list in Beirut first. Nicolas Chammas is literally the most right-wing economic figure. He's like the anti-protest movement kind of person who they had him on their list, and they had many other huge businessmen.
Sarkis and Metin,
Namat Frem, the biggest
industrialist
in Lebanon.
Yeah,
Michel Daher.
Yeah.
So it's really the party of the capitalists now, and the both kinds of capitalists, the bankers and the industrialists. But this is like established that FPM is a political elite now that contains a huge business lobby.
Yeah.
So
I think as well though, this is a larger thing that we need to discuss in the future.
Mm-hmm.
It is that where are the left-wing parties in this country, right?
Oh,
they don't exist, right?
Yeah.
And every party, you talk about the FPM, it's a right-wing party now. The LF is a right-wing party now. Like everybody basically is a right-wing party.
Yeah.
At some point in the future, we're gonna have to get into that.
Definitely.
But yeah, this is a good starting point to like go back and see where the FPM is and how they've gotten to this point, and. I don't know. We're thinking about doing this, talking about some of the other political parties as well in the future, sort of like deconstructing their history and everything. Let us know if that's something you want to hear. I think it would be interesting. I've been asking Nizar for weeks now, like, tell me what happened to the Lebanese Communist Party. Just like teach me everything. I think we should talk about that at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
I've been asking it other people as well. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, thanks so much for listening. We'll come back to you next week with a new episode as well. Until then, my name is Benjamin Red.
My name is Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El Fil.